In this demo, I'll walk you through the workflow we'll be using with Git and GitHub in this course. I'll be using GitHub to create and store a remote repository, and then I'll use Git locally to make changes and push those changes back up to GitHub. I'll use Visual Studio Code's Git integration to interact with my Git repo locally. This exercise will prepare you to use Git and GitHub throughout this course and for any other projects you may work on in the future. So if you look here, I have GitHub's website open and I've already logged into my account. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a new repo for this exercise. So from this view, I can do that here using the new repository button, or I can always use this create new menu at the top. So I'll do this way, and then I'll select new repository. That will bring us to a menu where we're asked to enter information about the repository we want to create. So I'll call this one Hello World. And I'll just give it a description of Hello World exercise. We'll have to leave this public unless you're paying for a private repo. And then we won't initialize this with a README because that's part of what we'll be doing manually later in this exercise. So I'll just enter that name and leave this public and select Create Repository. So now the repository has been created, and this is the dashboard for the repository. And we're in the Code tab, which will usually show the files that you have in your repository. But since this is empty, there's nothing here, and GitHub is giving us some suggestions on how to set that up. So the way we're going to do this using Visual Studio Code is by cloning the repo in Visual Studio Code. So we'll need to copy this URL that GitHub gives us, and that's the URL for the repository. So I've just copied this here, and I'm copying the HTTPS URL. So now that I've copied it, I'm going to switch over to Visual Studio Code on my computer. And from the home screen of Visual Studio Code, from the Welcome tab, you should see an option to clone a Git repository. So I'm going to click that and then enter that URL that I just copied and press enter. So once I do that, Visual Studio Code is asking me where I want to store this repo on my computer. So I'll create a new folder for that. So I'll just call it Hello World. And then I'll select that folder. And now Visual Studio Code has opened its folder view. So the Hello World folder that I just created is open in Visual Studio Code. And all files that I have in that folder and other folders that are inside of that will be displayed here. But since there's nothing there right now, it's empty. So let's go ahead and use the new file option in Visual Studio Code to create a file inside of that folder. And I'll call this readme.md. So that's created a file in the folder, and we'll add some text to it just for practice. I'll just say, hello world, I'm new to Git and GitHub. And I'll save that, and we'll see that I have a notification here in the Git menu in Visual Studio Code. So if I click here, it shows that I've made a change in a folder that's managed by Git and allows me to commit that change now that there are changes. So there are actually two categories of things that can be changed. Right now, this file is considered to be untracked. So that U icon says that this file is not being tracked by GitHub, but it is aware that there's a change there. I can add this clicking the stage button that's on the right, and now it's considered to be added to the index or staged. So the difference between these two sections is that files or changes that are in the stage section, you're telling Git that you are planning to commit these changes together. Everything that's in the changes section, you have made changes, but you're not yet planning to commit those changes. So just for an example, I'll add another file. I'll go back to this file view, create a file called helloworld.html, and I'll just say HTML coming soon here. Save that, go back to my Git menu, and I'll leave this file as untracked. So right now we have a stage change, which is the README file, and an untracked change, which is the HTML file. So the next step is to commit changes once you're ready to store them as a new version in your Git repo. So to do that, Visual Studio provides this easy interface where you can just type in your message, which will be the message that describes the change you're making. So here I'll just say adding a README file. And if I use this check mark here, I can commit only the changes that have been staged, which is only the README file. There are also other options here to commit all files, which would include things that have been staged and things that are in the changes section. But for now, I just want to commit the README file. So I'll click that, and I see that it looks like it's been committed. So we won't yet be able to see that change on my GitHub account because this is only committing the change locally to my Git repo on my computer. So the next thing is to push those changes to my GitHub repo. And pushing tells Git to send the commits that have not yet been updated on GitHub to your GitHub repo. So if I click on this Git menu here in Visual Studio Code, there's a push to option. So if I select that option, here it asks you to type where you're going to push these changes to. And in this case, you can see that origin is my GitHub repo. So I'm just going to type the word origin, and that will be the same for you. And I'll press enter. We see something's happening here. So once that's done, looks like that's done. So now I can switch back over to my GitHub repo online, and I'll refresh this page. And you can see that I now have that change that's been added a minute ago. So that's the change I just made, adding that file. So pushing that change updated it in my GitHub repo as well as my local repo. So although it may take some time to get used to at first, Git is a great tool to know how to use as a software developer, and it will be beneficial to you as you continue working on projects. So walk through this exercise a few times if you need to until you have an understanding of the workflow, and you'll be well prepared to take advantage of Git and GitHub to manage your work throughout this course and beyond.